Hi everyone, I'm Paul. One of the questions people often ask me is how I've actually managed money as a digital nomad in my 50s. Because I think from the outside, this kind of lifestyle can look exciting, a bit adventurous, maybe even a bit glamorous at times, but the reality is very different. If you want to do something like this later in life, money is one of the biggest things you have to think about. And I wanted to make this video because I think there's sometimes this idea that if you become a digital nomad, you must already have everything sorted. A big online income, loads of money coming in, and obviously a perfect plan. That really hasn't been my experience. So what I had was a plan, some savings, a bit of hope, and a willingness to work things out as I went along. And honestly, that has been the big part of this whole journey. So when I first came out to Bolivia, I had two pots of money in mind. The first was my emergency fund, which was £10,000. That was there as a proper safety net. So the idea was not to touch that unless I absolutely had to. Then I had another amount of £7,000 that I had saved from a previous 12-month contract. And that was really meant to cover everyday living. So my thinking at that time was quite simple. I worked out that our monthly costs in Bolivia were going to be around £500 a month. So in my head, that £7,000 was my buffer for the year. It wasn't loads of money, but it felt enough to give me a decent chance of making this work. And I think that's quite an important point, really. I didn't come out here with unlimited money. I came out here with enough to cover the basics and enough to give myself time to build something. So the original plan was to build a new business based around digital marketing training. Well, that was the idea. And to be fair, I started off quite well with that. I did a lot of free training initially, partly because I wanted to build up a customer base and get known for it and build up my reputation, if you like. And over time, that helped me build a list of around 900 people, which is actually a fairly good result. But the truth is, free training helped me build an audience more than it helped me make money. So although it was valuable, it wasn't really paying the bills in the way I'd first imagined. Then in February, I had a call from an old work colleague who asked me to look at creating some websites for a couple of their clients. And that ended up changing the direction of things quite a bit. Because from that point on, website design became my main income for the year. Now on paper, that sounds great. And in one sense, it was, because it brought in money and it helped keep us afloat. But there was another side to it as well. So because I hadn't done web work properly for quite a few years, I knew I needed fresh testimonials, live examples, and a portfolio I could actually use again. So I underpriced myself badly, really badly in fact. So to give you an idea, some of the simpler websites I was charging £299 for, when I really should have probably been charging closer to 1,000. When I actually sat down and worked out the time I had put into some of those jobs, plus the back and forth, plus the issues that came up because I was getting back into it and having to learn new things. One of the jobs worked out that I was earning something ridiculous like £1 an hour. So yes, I was earning money, but was I earning well? Not really. I was working hard, bringing something in, but not charging enough for the amount of effort involved. And I think that is another reality people don't always talk about. Sometimes when you start again, especially in your 50s, you're not just building income. You're building confidence, rebuilding positioning, and rebuilding proof. And that all takes time. The other thing that helped massively was Airbnb. Now this is important because Airbnb was never meant to be a big money maker for me. That wasn't the point of it. So the purpose was simply to cover the costs of keeping my house in the UK running while I was away. The house cost me about £1,100 a month to maintain, with everything kept on. And over the 12 months, Airbnb brought in around £14,000 with roughly 60% occupancy. So it did what it needed to do. It covered the costs. It didn't really make any profit, but that was never the goal. It took that pressure off and meant I didn't have to worry about the house draining money while I was out here. So really, when I look back at the first year, the financial picture was a mix of savings, website work, and Airbnb covering the house. And that combination is what made it all possible. But it definitely wasn't all straightforward. One of the biggest things I learned is that budgets look neat on paper, but in real life, it's never quite that tidy. Bolivia itself was been pretty affordable for us overall, and the original rough figure of about £500 a month was realistic for basic living there. But there were still months that cost more. And then when we went to Tefe in the Amazonas for 4 months, that changed everything. That was much more expensive. With rent and everything else, our living costs went up to around £1,500 a month there. And we also had to buy little bits of furniture for the flat. So that period ate into the savings much more than I expected. Then there were the visa costs as well, and that was another big one. When I came back into Bolivia after leaving Brazil, we had been away for 4 months. So my previous visa had effectively been cancelled, as I was only allowed to stay outside of Bolivia for a total of 3 months within the 12-month period. So I had to apply again. And in the end, I went for a 2-year visa, which cost more. So those kinds of things add up, and they're exactly the sort of costs that can catch you out, especially if you only budget for the basic. On the positive side, exchange rates really helped us at times. When I first arrived, the pound was very strong against the Boliviano. It was around 13.5 at one point, and even went up to around 18 to the pound, which made a huge difference. At the moment, it's around 11.5. So there's definitely a period where we benefited from that a lot. And when you're living abroad, those kinds of shifts can make more difference than you realize. Emotionally, I'd say the money side of this has been a bigger adjustment than I expected. Not because I didn't think about it, because I did, but because it's one thing to make a budget and another thing to live it. There is always something unexpected, like a visa, a trip, a move, a client gap, something that takes longer than it should, something that costs more than it should. And yes, I did dip into my savings, quite a lot actually. So that's the honest truth. That buffer carried me through the year and gave me breathing room. And I think without that, I would have felt a lot more pressure. So if anybody asked me whether this kind of thing is possible in your 50s, I would say yes, absolutely. But I would also say that you need to be realistic. It's not one long holiday. It does take planning, it does take work, and it helps massively if you can give yourself some kind of buffer, even if it is only enough to cover basic living while you find your feet. The bigger thing for me is that even though the original plan changed, I still found a way to make it work. And I think that matters, because when you get into your 50s, there can be this feeling that you are meant to be winding down, sticking with what you know, playing it safe, and getting ready for retirement. But I just don't think that has to be the case. You can start again. You can try something different. You can take a gamble on a different kind of life. You just need to go into it with your eyes open. So a year in, I'm still figuring it out, but this first year has been a really good test. It has shown me what works, what doesn't, where I underpriced, where the money actually came from, and what I need to do differently over the next 12 months. So no, I haven't got it all perfectly sorted, but I am learning, I'm adjusting, and I'm building something that feels more like my life than the one I left behind. And for me, that has made it all worth it. So thank you so much for watching. Please comment below with your thoughts and experiences, and I'll see you in the next one.